I'm Dr. Amol Gupta, and I want to thank you for joining me on another episode of Medicine Mentors, where we interview masters in medicine, leading physicians at the top universities across the United States to learn from their experiences and derive key insights, traits, and best practices that can guide medical students and residents. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Yael Schenker. Dr. Schenker is an associate professor in the Department of Medicine and the director of Palliative Care Research at the University of Pittsburgh, where she mentors numerous medical students, residents, fellows, and junior faculty in clinical and research settings. Dr. Schenker completed her medical school, residency, and fellowship in general internal medicine from the prestigious University of California, San Francisco. Since joining the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Schenker has collaborated on numerous palliative care research projects, with a focus in understanding and improving provision of palliative care in oncology. She has published widely on various topics, including surrogate decision-making, informed consent, healthcare advertising, and language barriers. Thank you so much, Dr. Schenker, for being on with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Schenker, you've been very successful in an academic career. I'd like to hear a bit of your journey and some of the major events in your life that have helped shape your success.
So I have been really lucky in that I have been able to travel a somewhat windy path, meaning my journey to directing a palliative research center was not a direct one. I didn't follow all the rules. I was a comparative literature major as an undergraduate in college, and I didn't take a single pre-med class because I was still figuring out what I wanted to do. I was still figuring out what motivated me. And you really had to have a reason to jump into organic chemistry. So I spent 4 years as a comp lit major learning how to think, learning how to craft an argument, learning how to write. And those turn out to be really important skills in a research career. And by the time I figured out I wanted to be a doctor, I really knew why. So for me, it was after college, I was volunteering as a Spanish language translator in a community clinic in San Francisco. And I was incredibly motivated by the patients I saw there, by their stories, by the way sort of social and cultural issues were so intertwined with their medical illness. And so when I went back and took the pre-med coursework, I really knew why I was there. I had a real reason. I wasn't kind of following expectations. That was a real privilege. I think no matter what path you take, whether it's direct or more windy, like mine, you need to sort of figure out why you're following it. And my path really allowed me to do that.
When you talk about it's important to know your why, what is the best way that somebody who's already in medicine but may not clearly know the answer to that question, who may not have had the life experiences where they've had to reflect enough on this question, delve back and say, well, why did I come into medicine? I mean, I love Dr. Schenker's reason, but how can somebody like myself start reflecting on this?
Yeah, so I think two things. One is that as physicians, we see 1,000 problems every day, 1,000 problems that could turn into research questions. And I think I continue to be really motivated by what I see as a physician, by the problems my patients face. Those are the things that turn into the best research questions for me. And that's a real privilege as physicians, as any kind of clinician, to have that view and to get to ask those questions. I think the second thing is a piece of advice that I got from a mentor back when I was in residency, which is the best questions are the things you read about in the newspaper. So it's not just, it hasn't been studied before, so I should study it. It's what are the questions that other people care about? And a great way to figure that out is to read the newspaper. Be part of the world outside your studies, outside the hospital, outside medicine.
Now, you followed a non-traditional path into medicine. What were the challenges that you faced on this journey, and how did you overcome them?
So I didn't follow the rules and do a research project during medical school. I as a resident, was part of a primary care research track at UCSF. And as part of that track, I started my first research project. And that project, again, didn't follow any of the rules. The advice was to find a shovel-ready project, data that had already been collected, somebody else's project that you could take a piece of. I didn't do that. I had a question that, again, was motivated by my observations. I felt like we weren't doing a great job with informed consent with patients who didn't speak English. And so I sort of jumped into a primary data collection project as a second year resident. I happened to also be pregnant with my first child at the time. And that whole enterprise would have been doomed to failure without mentorship. And so I think that has been finding a mentor who saw what motivated me, who believed in me, who was willing to shepherd me through that process was absolutely critical and has continued to be so important for me at every step of the way. And medicine is not a solo enterprise. It's absolutely a team sport. And so finding mentors, finding people who believe in you, people who have now turned into colleagues and collaborators, that I think is absolutely important.
You touched upon mentorship and the tremendous role it played in that project. Can you talk to us a little bit about your mentors and what role they've played in your personal and professional growth?
Yeah, and so I have always had many mentors and continue to have many mentors. And one thing to say is that mentorship starts from day one and continues through today. So you never grow out of needing mentors. And I think you need different kinds of mentors for different things. For me, my first research mentor at UCSF was the person who really believed in me, who was willing to let me break some of those rules, helped me because I was sort of watching the way she asked research questions and the way she made choices, helped me get really excited about research as a career. And of course, that first project and the chance to ask my own question and then gather the data to answer that question and publish that and share that with other people, that was absolutely what hooked me as a researcher and convinced me to continue having research as part of my career. I figured out early on how important mentorship was to that process. And when I was looking for my first job, I absolutely chose this position based on the mentorship here. The fit with mentors, people who I had identified, who I knew that I would be able to work well with, and also the culture of mentorship at the University of Pittsburgh. We have a real strong culture of hands-on mentorship. This is not a sink or swim kind of a place. And I think that's really important in academic medicine.
Some of us can really build very strong and stable relationships with our mentors, but others have challenges in finding mentors, developing the relationship, and really extracting the best that the mentor can offer in our lives. What would your advice be to find a mentor, improve that relationship, and then really get the maximum value out of it?
I think you need to ask strategically. I think mentorship is absolutely one of my favorite parts of my job. People want to work with mentees who are creative. It's a process of learning from each other, mentees who bring new ideas, mentees who have done their homework, who come prepared. And I think doing that, asking strategically, being clear about what you're asking for, and then following up and simple things, sending a thank you. People forget to do that. But those little things clue in mentors that you're someone they're going to want to work with. And I think it's also about the fit. You have to pay attention to that. I don't think it makes sense to jump in and commit right away to a mentoring relationship. You have to figure out, and often there are some growing pains figuring out what that relationship is going to look like and what that fit is going to be. I think communication is really important. Being clear about upfront what the expectations are, what the expected final product of that particular project or relationship is. So you need to get on the same page about those things.
So, over the hundreds of students and residents and fellows that you've been a part of training, what would you say are some of the key traits and habits of the students who have really been successful?
So we talked about asking for help strategically, and I think that's a really important piece, learning how to do that, learning how to be proactive and reach out and ask for what you need. I have noticed that that is really hard for many mentees and trainees. And I think that people who figure out how to do that, who practice that, who keep reaching out, who keep those lines of communication open, tend to be successful in finding mentoring relationships. I think another part, and this is something that I think a lot about working with mentees, is learning how to tell your story. And I think it doesn't matter as scientists how amazing your experiments are or sort of how thorough your literature review is, if you don't know how to share that science with other people and you don't know how to tell your story, you're not going to have the same impact. And I think this is something that's particularly hard for medical students because medical school trains that out of you. You forget how to write a complete sentence. You're very much focused on gathering facts and memorizing facts. But I think that people who remember and practice communicating a story, writing, reading, again, it comes back to reading the newspaper, and that turns out to be a really important skill. And then another thing I would say is you have to finish what you start. And I think, again, being clear from the beginning of any relationship, what the expectations are, and then making a schedule for yourself, and then recognizing that everything takes 3 to 5 times longer than you think it's going to, but being clear upfront about what the end point is and getting there, I think is really, really important.
So you've shared a lot with us today, but if I were to ask you one thing that you wish you knew when you started medical school that you today know with absolute certainty as being a key to success, what would that be?
I think when you look at the resumes of successful people and when we describe the list of accomplishments, what we don't see in there, what it's easy to forget about, is that for every resume of successes, there is an equally long, if not longer, resume of rejections. And that, I think, is really important for us to remember at every stage of training, at every stage of our careers, and then to figure out how to navigate that. And for me, it has been really important to make a switch from focusing on self-esteem, which is what I think we navigate towards in medicine, is pumping ourselves up. We're a bunch of really competent, really well-trained, really well-educated people, and we can do this. And the problem is that that doesn't work so well when then you get a rejection or when things don't go the way you expected. And so for me, it's been switching from self-esteem to figuring out how to be kind to myself when things don't go well, sometimes called self-compassion. Figuring out how to keep that connection to what's most important to me, because that's what gets you through. And I think that's what I've learned and continue to learn, and I think becomes really important in this career.
This is wonderful. I'm going to try to distill what I've learned out of the so many things that you've shared with us today into really 3 things that I think we can start to apply immediately. I'd say the first thing is to know your why. And what I really learned from your journey is that it's okay if it takes more time, a non-traditional path, But really, once we find our why, that gives the stimulus and the energy to really pursue the path, really do well in our research like you've been able to do at a relatively young age with all these grants and high impact publications. And so I think your life story has a lot of validity to the value of knowing why before we focus on the how.
Exactly.
I'd say the second thing that I've learned is that medicine is not a solo enterprise, it's a team sport. And so in a team, there's a coach, and we need a coach, we need a mentor, and we shouldn't be afraid to reach out. But in reaching out, the way to establish successful relationships, like you've mentioned, is by asking strategic questions, following up with a thank you, and setting clear expectations. And I'd say these are really the three tools that we applied to any mentor-mentee relationship. We'd probably get a lot more out of the relationship. I'd say lastly, and something that I need to work on a lot, is to be kind to myself in the face of failure. Because when we're kind to ourselves, what you taught us today is that we're all accomplished and successful. It's just a much more productive way of looking at that downtime than to sit down and be depressed, and actually create a plan and be energized to fix whatever went wrong and propel ourselves in the future. Thank you so much. It was really an honor, Dr. Schenker, to have this opportunity of talking with you and learning from you. To our audience, thank you for tuning in with us here on the Medicine Mentors. Thank you for joining us as we learn from the Masters of Medicine.